It is an honor and a privilege to be able to share with you this morning. And as we look into God's word, a little bit we've seen from Habakkuk. And in the last 2 years, we've seen God working in incredible ways, redeeming lives, restoring relationships. And we've had the privilege of walking with a number of people like we shared in the slides as they've journeyed in their growing in their understanding of Jesus. And we've had the privilege of being a part of a local church that has grown leaps and bounds in the last couple of years, mobilizing missions within Europe, as well as providing needs in Africa. We've helped kids stay safe around the world through the prevention curriculum that we helped create. Mentoring young leaders, young married couples, and the list could go on, but I'll stop there. We truly are grateful for all that the Lord has done and continues to do in Spain and around the world. At the same time, there's a side of life in ministry that is not as easy to share about. These are situations of pain, of loss, of suffering, feeling powerless in the face of injustice and evil. These things have weighed heavy on my soul in the last couple of years. There were many times when my best efforts to intervene failed, seeing situations of pain and suffering in those around me. I found myself questioning God and wondering why he did not intervene the way I wanted him to. And at times I felt like God wasn't listening, or that he didn't really understand what I was going through, or that he cared, quite frankly. And though he did answer, I didn't always understand how he answered. The more I journeyed in the lives of others in their pain, the more my heart ached. And over the last few months, I've cried out to the Lord in anguish, pleading him to heal a marriage, a broken marriage that ended up in divorce, to embolden an abuse survivor that dropped their charges because of pressure from the abuser, to restore relationships within families divided by anger, bitterness, and hurt, to protect children living in an abusive family where I could do nothing about it, and to cure a friend who you saw in the picture with an advanced stage of cancer. How about you? Can you relate? In what ways are you asking God to intervene in your life this morning to bring an end to pain, suffering, and injustice? What is it that comes to mind right now? Maybe it's a loss of a job, being overlooked for a deserved promotion, family turmoil or conflict, a child that's suffering in some way, maybe from a severe accident or an illness. Maybe it's a difficult marriage, a divorce, a betrayal of a loved one, a cancer diagnosis, an addiction, or feeling isolated, alone, and without hope. How do we respond? How do we respond when it feels like the world is falling down around us? How do we reconcile these tensions? How can our faith grow and our relationship with a loving God grow as we face difficulties and challenges that are very real? This morning, we're going to go back in time and hear from a man who was wrestling with these questions himself. And I think you know who we're talking about. Habakkuk was a prophet, as Micah had shared a little bit earlier. He was a prophet before the Babylonian invasion. And he was unique because he brings no messages from God to the people. All that is recorded in this small 3-chapter book is a conversation between Habakkuk and God. Nothing else. The book begins with Habakkuk voicing and bringing his grievances before God, his frustrations to him because of what he thinks is God's lack of intervention in the world around him. As this conversation develops and continues, Habakkuk's perspective and his attitudes radically change. If you haven't read the book of Habakkuk, I encourage you later today to read it in its entirety. We're going to take a look at the first 4 verses in chapter 1 of Habakkuk. Habakkuk starts by crying out to the God. I'm going to read 1 through 4. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Violence is everywhere. I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds? Why must I watch in misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction and violence. I'm surrounded by people who love to argue and fight. The law has become paralyzed. There is no justice in the courts. The wicked far outnumber the righteous, so that justice has become perverted. Have you ever felt that way? This is actually a normal and healthy response to living in a broken world. It's evidence of our God-given desire to crave the world we were made for, a world of peace, where there's peace, harmony, and justice. We move on. God responds in verses 5 through 11, and I think it can be summed up in verse 6 by God essentially saying, hey, Habakkuk, verse 6, I am raising up the Babylonians, a cruel and violent people. Now, the rest of chapter 1 into verse 2, Habakkuk responds, and he's like, hold on. What? What are you talking about? How does this make any sense? How does this fix anything? I just bared my heart before you with my grievances, with the pain, and you're telling me about the Babylonians and how terrible they are and how they're going to come and cause more pain and more anguish to my people? This is your answer? I don't understand. Have we felt that way? Have we ever felt that way before? Perhaps God seems to be so disconnected from the situations that we're actually living. God answers Habakkuk again in verse 3 of chapter 2. He says, this is for a future time. It describes an end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. Let's pause. Let's pause here for a moment and put ourselves in Habakkuk's shoes and imagine how we might respond. I might say, no, excuse me, no, God, I need you now. My friend is dying of cancer now. The divorce papers are being signed today, and children are in harm's way right now. Your future plan, it doesn't work with me. But the conversation continues. God saying to Habakkuk, hold on. You don't think I care? Or that I don't intervene? Let me show you how serious I am about making things right, how serious I am about justice, how serious I care about those who are suffering, because I care way more than you could ever understand. Are you sure you really want to understand what I am doing about this? God's response here in the text is mind-blowing as he gives Habakkuk a macro view of his intention for justice and intervention for all nations, addressing things like human pride, the love of power, ruthlessness, greed, theft, slavery, extortion, murder, violence, dishonesty, shame, corruption, drunkenness, manipulation, bullying, the mistreatment of animals and creation, and idolatry. These words from God leave Habakkuk awestruck, moving him to respond to God, singing. Chapter 3:1. I'm not going to sing this for you. I'm going to read it. But it moves his heart to sing these words. I'm going to read just a few selected verses. Chapter 3, verse 1. I've heard all about you, Lord. I am filled with awe by your amazing works. In this time of our deep need, help us again as you did in years gone by. Verse 3. His brilliant splendor fills the heavens, and the earth is filled with his praise. His coming is as brilliant as the sunrise. Rays of light flash from his hands, where his awesome power is hidden. When he stops, the earth shakes. When he looks, the nations tremble. He shatters the everlasting mountains and levels the eternal hills. He is the eternal one. You crushed the heads of the wicked and stripped their bones from head to toe. Verse 17, even though the fig trees have no blossoms and there are no grapes on the vine, even though the olive crop fails and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the Lord and the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights. Is this the same man that just spoke against God in chapter 1? How radically different does this sound from his original complaint? It's radically different, right? You guys tracking with me? Radically different. But what is fascinating about this text is it doesn't tell us that anything in Habakkuk's external circumstances have changed. In fact, we read in verse 17 that things are going to get worse. However, something radically has changed within Habakkuk. So what led to this change? I have a couple of suggestions, observations I'd like to share with you. First, Habakkuk has faith in God's promises. God gives Habakkuk his word. His promises that he will enact injustice and he will deal with evil and suffering. God's promises expand Habakkuk's vision, helping him know the heart and character of God. This promise gives him a vision beyond what he can see. God is doing something much bigger than Habakkuk is able to see in the moment. God is essentially saying, Habakkuk, do you trust me? Do you believe that I will do what I said I will do? Justice will come, and I will make all things right. Not just for you, but for all humanity. Even though Habakkuk knows that things are going to get worse, his faith grows because he trusts in God's promises, which give him strength, peace, and joy. Habakkuk is having direct conversation honest discussion with God. And he's fully expecting God to answer him. Notice, he's not going to his friends, bad-mouthing or talking bad about God. He's not taking justice into his own hands, nor is he becoming callous and indifferent with human pain. He's going directly to God. This should encourage us to take our pain and suffering to God. But you see, we have a choice to make with what we do with our pain. And the tragedy of suffering is less about its existence than its ability to separate us from the only source of love, healing, and hope that is found in a relationship with Jesus. Pain has the power to send us toward God or away from God. We're all dealing with different stuff, every one of us in this room. I don't know where you go with your pain and what relief it temporarily promises, but God is the only one who can give you lasting relief. And he invites you to come to him. What is it that keeps us from bringing our pain to God? Are we laying our complaints before him with the candor Habakkuk has? Do we have this kind of faith? If you're not sure, we can ask God to have the faith to believe. Are we honest with him? Do we firmly believe that he will respond to us if we come to him? He promises in his word, if we ask, he will respond. In Hebrews 4:16, we're encouraged to come boldly before the throne of God, where we will receive mercy and grace, and where we will receive the help we need most. Now, just because God gives Habakkuk a greater understanding does not mean that the suffering and pain from Habakkuk's circumstances will improve or vanish. So while I trust that God will respond, it still hurts deeply knowing my friend is dying of cancer, or that children continue to be harmed every day, or that abusers are not brought to justice. The pain we feel can lead us to ask, where is God? How long must we wait for him to heal the relationships in my family? God is present and certainly does not overlook suffering, but this internal tension we live with is very real. Though it may feel like our timeline and God's timeline just don't match up, God is on the move. Habakkuk has faith in God's promises. Second, Habakkuk abides in God's presence. Here in the text, we observe an intimate, familiar, personal relationship between Habakkuk and God. God responds to Habakkuk by entering in to relationship with him, being present with Habakkuk as he airs out his angst and his frustrations. And God did this for us, for all humanity on the cross. Through sacrificial love, the power of sin and evil were broken. See, Jesus enters in with us in our suffering. His desire for us is to approach him with open and vulnerable hearts, just as we see Habakkuk do. Could it simply be God's presence that makes Habakkuk feel safe within a divine embrace in the face of evil? Imagine your 3-year-old son comes running to you after being knocked over by a large dog. You pick him up in your arms, and your terrified son clings to you as he cries hysterically. No amount of logical explanation in that moment would calm him down. As you hold your child safely in your arms, his heartbeat starts to slow down, and his breathing becomes more calm until he is completely at ease. Now, the scary dog encounter, it did not magically disappear, but now your child is safe in your arms, and that changes everything. Your child abides with you until he is calm, and then he gets down and runs off to play again. And because he knows he can return to you and be held anytime he feels unsafe. I don't know what you're going through in your life, but I know God is like that. He wants us to run to him and come to his arms and to be held by him. Well, I don't know what God or how God will answer me or you. I am convinced that, like Habakkuk, as we abide with God, something fundamentally changes in our hearts. It's his presence that give us hope and give us strength. It's his presence, I believe, that give us the faith to believe. Now, I have cried out in various situations, some of which I've shared here this morning, and many others. And God has assured me that he's got me, even though I don't understand the how or the why or the details. But I know that God, through this process, is growing my faith. And he is reminding me and he's assuring me that he has a plan and he is at work to deal with all of our suffering and pain. And there will be a time when all evil will be defeated. There will be a time when all suffering and pain will be gone and all will be restored and made right. Jesus' fulfillment of God's promises was a future event for Habakkuk, right? Because Jesus had not come into the world. But for us, this is an added benefit because we live between Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection and his second coming. So our hope and conviction are rooted in what God has done through Jesus. And because he has kept his word, we can have the faith that he will fulfill what he has said and make things right. Every time life gets hard, I am reminded to turn to God and that it is he who sustains me in his love. It is he who calms my anxious heart and holds me in the midst of the storm. If you don't know Jesus in a personal, intimate way, or if you are finding it difficult or challenging to bring your pain to Jesus, I really encourage you this morning to think about that offer, that invitation by Jesus to place your faith and trust in him so you can abide in him and you can bring your pain and your brokenness and your suffering to him so that he can hold you and calm your troubled heart. As we this morning have faith in God's promises, and as we abide in him while faced with adversity, suffering, and the darkness in this world, may we respond as Habakkuk does as the book comes to a close. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights.